Ever since I started playing Animal Crossing New Horizons in 2020, I've built up more than 14 different islands, and over this time, my decorating style has evolved and turned into what I call a no tile left behind approach, until this island. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I would like to take you on a journey through my different islands and why this specific island has changed and disrupted what I thought was a set system. And we'll also go over the process of how I built this island up and even finish and set a DA. Let's go back to 2020. Not actually though. The first island I started back in the day went through quite a few changes. I started with what now is often referred as normcore before I then tried my hand at a couple of fall decorations, and then finally in 2021 I decided to build a plantcore island. This was the first island that I ever finished and it was busy. There were items, trees, flowers, and also codes everywhere. And I absolutely loved this back then. The full islands, the slight clutter vibe, it just kind of made the overall island feel complete. And decorating every single tile also gave me the slight relief of not having to worry about any flower spawning or fossils being in places that I didn't want, and just truly checking an area off as done. And so over the next few islands, I then quote unquote perfected this approach. I learned to reduce the amount of codes and then played a little bit more with different tree sizes and colors and flowers, and found what I thought my decorating style was. And this was how I decorated for quite a while. And honestly, I still do sometimes. But last year, I started an island that would change this entire approach. I first got the idea for this island theme while I was on the train on my way to my parents and was just kind of staring out of the window. I'm from Germany, so a lot of what you see there are open fields sectioned off into different areas, and then every once in a while there's a little town or just a couple of houses sprinkled in. And so I thought, why not build an island that would remind me a little bit of my hometown? Bring a little bit of calm and simplicity into my island building, you know? And so I started planning. I chose käffchen as the name because it is a cute play on the word kaff. Kaff is almost a negative term for like a tiny town. People use it to sort of say, oh my god, that's such a kaff, nothing ever happens there, you know? And then adding the CHEN to words in German turns it into kind of a smaller or cuter version of it. And in this case, the A also gets the two little dots. And a lucky coincidence, it's also the cute version of coffee, which is Kaffee in German, and then käffchen if cute and small. As I often do with my islands, I also created a little mood board and planned some items and villagers, and soon after it was time to actually find a map and get started. Initially, this was just supposed to be a little bit of a challenge to try a more minimal and simple approach when decorating and reduce the overall stress that the no tile left behind approach would sometimes inflict on me. And so I also decided to make this a completely flat island because that was something I had quite enjoyed before when I created my lush swamp island. I wasn't looking for many things with my map, and so on the second reroll I actually decided to check out this one here. Resident services, somewhat close to the airport. Peninsula, honestly not so great and nothing to really write home about. But then Hazel ended up being my starter, so this map was definitely a winner. And thus I went through the typical island start shenanigans. I named the island käffchen as promised, got a nice little donation from Chrissy, my Twitch mod, and got to auto-filling my plots. At this point, I consider myself quite lucky with Rex, Patty, and June, but what I didn't know is that I would actually get into a huge argument with June later on, and I now no longer like her. And no, I will not be taking any questions. My campsite visitor, aka villager number 6, ended up being Roswell. I don't have any specific feelings about him, but that sure is an interesting way of blinking. And then plot 7 and 8 were then filled by Camofrog, kinda cute, and Eloise. She's okay. Not that any of these villagers really matter, as I will kick most of them out anyways. Not you though, Hazel. You're perfect. With 3 stars then reached, it was time for a big cleanup. And with this island, I also of course went ahead and fully flattened all the cliffs. The water I kind of wanted to try and work with, the part on the bottom level anyways. And with the island then flat, I also took care of the next thing on the to-do list and found myself a nice little selection of codes that would work well for the simplistic approach. And then it was time to decorate for the first time. Let's not talk about my outfit, by the way, we'll just have to accept that for what it is. My first step here would be to figure out the path. Now, I knew that I wanted to use the in-game dirt and then ended up doing a 3-tile wide path, and thanks to some custom designs, I was actually also able to lay it diagonally like this by rounding the corners and then applying that custom design. And I also decided to add a little something extra by adding those borders. All right, so the basic path was decided. And then to recreate those little towns, I decided to create little house clusters all across the map. So I wanted to start the first neighborhood right here by the entrance. And of course, Hazel would have to be part of that. I decided to focus on a few more tasks that would help bring along the vibe. I customized my own house to bring that German vibe across some more. I customized Hazel's house, and then I also added some more border to the street, those stones by the entrance, and I planted some weeds on the path. I knew that I wanted to have a few more houses here, so I tried a few different locations and brought over some bigger items to try and imagine it, but didn't fully settle with any idea just yet. That would only happen the next time I played. In the meantime, I had also made this town sign inspired by the ones that you do actually see in Germany whenever entering a town or city, and then rearranged the houses until I ended up with this. And now it was finally time to implement the let's leave tiles behind approach. Initially, this was actually kind of hard because I could almost feel my brain fighting against me. How do people do this? I've got this strong urge to put something everywhere. Areas just almost felt incomplete if I didn't do that. So I decided I needed a transparent tile. That would allow me on the one hand to actually keep flowers from spawning, so I wouldn't have to go back and forth and clean up, etc. But also this would allow me to almost cheat my way a little bit because it gave me the control of sort of covering every tile or almost every tile while keeping that calmer look. And then I can still do busier areas whenever I actually want to, like this little flea market cluster or also this recycle area that I built later on by resident services. And then there can also be areas like this overgrown yard here where I wanted to sort of look busy and overgrown without actually being overly cluttered. After some first bits of decorating, I actually heavily focused on the flow and layout of this island first. That way I would be able to create my frame and then just fill it with the decorations later. This wasn't the first island where I did this, but it was the one that made me realize that I quite enjoy this order because it separates the different decisions and therefore reduces overwhelm. I definitely still struggled with this though, of course, it wasn't an overly smooth process, and my brain definitely got twisted quite a few times when laying the path and deciding where to place houses, and I even decided to bring on 4 other characters to add in some more German cliches, but ultimately focusing on the layout first really did make the decorating lots more fun later on. Over the next couple of weeks playing, I also filled up the last 2 plots and invited Dobie and Ozzy, and then Camo Frog decided to leave, so Butch took his place, and I also invited Flurry, and Rex left to make room for her. With a good chunk of the layout for the front part of the island now done, and all the extra residents now added, I next up worked on a big canola farm with an adjacent potato field, and quite honestly, I think this is when it sort of clicked in my head. I think this island really taught me a lot about spacing out items and flowers in a way that it still covers enough space without actually cluttering the area. And it was also the island where I just accepted to go with my ideas, no matter how simple or repetitive they maybe felt. Previously, I wanted every single area to be something distinct with lots of items and so on. But this time, I really tried being okay with just settling into calmer ideas as well, even if it was farm number 15. And with these potatoes here, for example, I just decided to accept the weeds the way they were and just started planting the crops in between. And then, except for some framing trees and some fence and just a few fillers, that was basically it. I also ended up inviting Grizzly to käffchen, and then took an unintentional break from this island because I played a lot of Stardew and also started a new island in the meantime. But upon returning to käffchen, I had now figured out the vibe that I wanted thanks to that farm. Now, admittedly, it might have not been quite as minimalistic as I first thought it might be, but instead I feel like I somehow found a balance between the maximalist decorating that I usually did and the minimalist that I wanted, and this mixture really ended up leaving a lasting impression. I went right back to working on the layout some more so I could really lock in that framework, and created a little neighborhood with Grizzly, Butch, and myself on the right hand side of the island, and also created a little lone grandpa residence behind the plaza with a bridge leading to it. I wanted to leave the initial 3 house plots where they are, and also plant the last neighborhood in the very back left with 1 villager, Tank was soon replaced by Dina, and 1 non-resident. And then I even went in and I laid all the pathing to connect all the different house clusters and even created a little main shopping street in the very back of the island. And then it felt like over the next few weeks after that, I really settled into the idea. I added some German cliches like a car cleaning front yard, and then built a few different farms, and also worked on things that just reminded me of my hometown, like a little hiking trail. This was also the island where I think I first used baby trees, aka trees that only grew for one day. Previously, they were never quite like tall enough, but now I really appreciate that they make an area feel a little bit less busy. We even ended up having a brief winter interlude, or winterlude if you will, and created a German Christmas market with a bunch of different stalls around the shopping street. Swapping out the codes and trying to get the island to look cute during that very different time was probably the first time I actually thought about maybe just keeping this island even when fully decorated. With the Christmas market then done and even a little work in progress dream address uploaded, it was then time to go back to the green grass though and continue the regular decorating. During this time, I really loved working on this island just off video and off stream, which actually hadn't happened in quite a while. I even worked on the interiors for all the villagers out of my own free will and not just out of obligation because I needed to get them done for the dream address. I added a daisy field, a pumpkin patch, a hyacinth farm, and an entire apple orchard, and also started switching that Christmas market over to a farmer's market. And then after lots and lots of fillers, a mushroom forest, and a few different front yard decorations, I invited Kitty to the island and decided that this last area to the very back left would be a little construction plot, because that is also very German after all. And then at this point, I basically had decided to turn this into my forever island. And so I thought, how nice would it be to actually have a complete museum in the dream? And so the bug and fish catching then derailed my progress for quite a bit. But then I kind of realized, it doesn't have to be done right away, right? Like if I'm keeping this island, I can easily do a dream address update at some point. And for now, honestly, it would be really nice to have a little finished project. So I would say it is time to take stock and get this island done. Now I've already done a little cleanup and gotten all my fossils and all that, so we just need to identify the open spaces and then work on those. Let's start with a few more low effort fillers. The first area is this little spot just behind Butch's house, and all I've done so far is place a little bench. So I thought, why not turn this into a little fishing spot? I added some wheat fields and flowers, of course, and a bucket. And honestly, we're good to go. Then I've also left this and this spot just a little bit too open in front of the shopping district. On the right-hand side, I decided to add some wheat fields once again, some more of that country fence, and an escaped flue from the farm next to it, and of course some flowers as well. And then on the left side, it was basically classic fillers, some flowers, a rock, and some weeds. That is basically it. Then we also have this space just behind Nook's Cranny. Now, to be honest, you actually barely see this, and I don't think anyone would notice if I left this open, but I would just feel a little bit better if there was a little something going on. The most important thing here would be to put some dirt underneath the trucks. And then I decided to plant a couple of cosmos as like a daisy flower cluster. And of course, I added some wheat fields, and then with just a few weeds and also some of those see-through tiles, we can also mark this as complete, I would say. And the same goes for this little section behind Able Sisters. Once again, not too noticeable, but just with a few wheat fields, flowers, yet another rock, and then some shrubs. This one is also done. That's basically all it takes, but it just looks a little bit more complete this way, I feel like. And then I'm not sure, but I think I abandoned this space behind the bus stop at some point because it feels just a tiny little bit too empty. I literally just added like 3 flowers and a code and some weeds, and that is it. Then I took a quick break just to update my passport information, and now it is time to tackle some of these slightly higher effort areas. Let's start with the neighborhood, which also includes this tiny little section to the front. Now, I had a rock spawn here directly next to a tree at one point, which at first I thought maybe I could keep because it's kind of cool, but I actually don't love the position of the tree, so it's gotta go. I replanted 2 other trees instead, and then decided to turn this little spot to the front into a little duck area, and then also chopped that tree in the center to open up the space a little bit more. Apart from that, the area also just got a couple of flowers as well as another rock, and I also placed a bike here. And then let's focus on the houses. Now for Punchy, I just dropped this tire and then planted a couple of weeds because the car cleaning was basically already done. And then Flurry got some more daisies added on the right hand side of her house, and then a mixture of some flowers, shrubs, and of course weed fields and a rock on the left hand side. And then just in front of Kitty's home, I decided to add a little yellow mailbox and then gave her a tiny little flower garden with some different mums. I added some seed bags with watering can, a tree stump, and then a few more flowers to the center of the neighborhood, and that also marks the neighborhood off as complete. I also realized that I hadn't yet gone over the street on the left side of the island, so I took a break from the areas by just adding a few weeds all across the road. It's just like a tiny detail and all in all not that important, but I think it makes everything look just a little bit cozier, which I absolutely love. And then I decided to tackle Dina and Sabina's front yards. I wanted to definitely include some trash bins here too, and then give Sabina her own little flower front yard. So I went ahead and created 3 of these little dirt squares and then figured out some tree spots in between. These would mostly be small trees, of course, to not overcrowd the space, but I think it'll look quite nice. I did also make sure to fill the space behind the houses with a few taller trees though. In this process, I also decided to actually extend the path at the corner and lead the street towards that construction plot as well. And I also went right ahead to add the borders as well as the weeds so that I wouldn't put the unfinished street back onto the to-do list. With a few more trees planted just behind Sabina's house, I also added some flowers to her garden and decided to go for a white, yellow, and orange patch of tulips. And one cliche I still had on my list and hadn't yet built into the island are garden gnomes. So why don't we add some of those as though they're like taking care of the flowers, right? I also planted some trees over at Dina's place and then also decided to give her a couple of flowers too. So for her, I just added tiny little dirt patches. And then this part to the left of the new path is admittedly not a lot of space, but somehow I still felt like I wanted to add something a little bit special here. So I added on some hedge fencing and then decided to recreate another recycling area here. I used an ABD, basically for old clothing recycling, 2 of these steel trash cans for bottle recycling, and then also this yellow mailbox that I still had from Sabina. I also made sure to add a recycling sign so everyone knows what's going on here. And then it was time to grow all those plant trees. And now for the finishing touches. I swapped out the placeholder Zen cushions that I placed here before for some trash bags, put up some clotheslines in Sabina's garden, and then added a garden faucet for Dina along with some stacked bags. And since I was already carrying some garden supplies, I also worked a bit on the hyacinth farm since that one was still missing a few details. So we also got some stacked bags here and some dropped hyacinths as well. And then I still kind of kept jumping back and forth to the neighborhood and then swapped out some of the tulips I'd planted before for other flowers instead, because I felt like it added a little bit more character and just made it look a bit softer somehow. And then I went back to Dina's place, gave her a watering can, and went right back to the hyacinth farm to place another shovel. Something was still missing here, I felt like, and I hope that we can all agree that bunnies were definitely the thing to add. Last but not least, I placed a tin bucket and then I once again filled my pockets with a couple of flowers and items, and I did one last round of fillers. Some wheat fields, some flowers, some shrubs, and even some pumpkins as well. And now we're really almost done. The last thing I had to do was clean up the beaches to remove all those flowers and pumpkins, and then instead I spread around some pansy sprouts as well as weeds and a lot of the seaweed that I had found while diving. After what was, I think, more than 6 hours spread across 3 separate days, the island is finally more or less finished, and I was able to start prepping to upload a dream address. Now, one thing I haven't done is decorate the houses from the extra residence, and of course I could still complete my Critterpedia museum, but honestly I currently don't really feel the urge to, so I just won't. Käffchen started as just a nice little challenge and a more simplistic or minimalistic approach to island decorating, but after playing this game for 5 years now, this island really surprised me and it taught me a couple of things, like the fact that not every tile needs something on it in order for an area to look cute and still detailed, but also that see-through tiles definitely are a lifesaver. Also focusing on the layout first and truly getting the entire structure of the island done, and basically checking off landscaping and street laying and then houses and villagers and all that was absolutely amazing because it reduced the overwhelm and it allowed me to then focus on the decorating. And of course, don't be afraid to repeat ideas. If anything, lean into it. I especially learned this with interiors because for this island, I actually did this thing where all the interiors are basically the same layout, but just adjusted in their their colors and kind of style according to the villagers. And I feel like it's been quite a while since I've had this much fun with interiors. So honestly, repeat stuff. Why not? Use the same layout and then just work on a couple of different items, or use the same idea and try like a different layout. It was honestly so freeing. Now, of course, I might still create some busier islands when I feel like it fits the theme, but I am genuinely excited to see how I will implement these changes. Now, keep an eye out for the final island tour of käffchen, and also of course the DA reveal. And then we have another island to finish soon, aka Framework, aka my film studio island, which I am very excited but also kind of nervous about. But for now, I will say thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that maybe it inspired you as well, or maybe you knew all these things already and you're kind of like, why are you overthinking everything? And quite honestly, I asked myself the same thing, but alas, here we are. Anyways, make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and then I will hopefully see you in my next one. Bye everyone!